All right, here we go. It's Power Hour time. We have Adam Owada. He's teaching our Python course, and he's also going to give us a little talk today on prompt engineering with ChatGPT, which is all of a sudden, it's an important thing. It scares the crap out of me, but hopefully Adam can make it less scary. I would love it, actually. We're recording, by the way, and this will be posted up to our YouTube channel. I'd love it. I think Adam would too. If you all would go on mute, number one, everybody hit the mute button, and then also turn your cameras on. Because I think Adam's going to blow your ever-loving mind with how cool this is. And I want to see your faces going, oh, really? Like, I want to see the reactions, right? Yeah, Hex has got it. Like, whoa, the mind blown. So camera's on, microphone's off. Adam, you got it. Take it away, brother.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone, devs and cybersecurity professionals and guests alike. Welcome to my Partner Power Hour today. Today, as John said, I'm going to be talking about ChatGPT, harnessing ChatGPT, prompt engineering for developers and ops. And my name is Adam Owada. Let's practice using our Zoom. And can I ask everyone to please mute themselves and turn on your cameras. Give me a Zoom reaction, like a thumbs up if you've ever heard of or used ChatGPT before. And I've got all the participants up so I can see everything going on the side there. Awesome, awesome. You know what's cool is, John, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up, and I'm also seeing a lot of people with thumbs up without their thumbs up. And that's great, because even if you are completely new to code or ops, if you've never used ChatGPT before or even heard of it, that's totally fine. We're going to cover the basics today, and it assumes no prior knowledge. And also, I modified the title of my presentation to include ops, because we're going to talk about ops as well today, too. So let's get this started. The best questions are not necessarily those that get answers, but those that lead to sharper questions. By Penelope Trunk. Circa 2007, 16 years ago, all more relevant today. But I love this question, this quote, because the formal definition of prompt engineering is very dry, where the process of designing and refining input prompts to obtain desired responses from AI models. We're asking questions. We're asking the best questions we can, and we're trying to get answers, but also sometimes we're just asking questions that lead to better questions. So without getting too ahead of ourselves, because we got some groundwork to cover, let's kind of cover our agenda today. And before I get too deep into this, my style, especially if you've ever taken a class with me, feel free to ask questions in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to go off mute respectfully, and ask a question. We'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. But I want to hear some questions that you have along the way. Why does AI scare the bejesus out of you? Ooh, well, because I've seen Terminator 2. That's why, David. But here's what we're talking about today. What is ChatGPT? Especially if you're new and you've never used it before, we got to talk about some of the basics. To even begin to answer how to use the tool, we got to understand what it is. We need to understand why we're even considering prompt engineering, and what do we need to understand about ChatGPT in order to write good prompts. And then the second half of today's presentation, where we're going to be spending a majority of our time, is going over what I consider 3 or 4 really, really fundamental prompt engineering patterns. Now, I want to point this out. This is my take on this, and you can read some guides about 101 data science prompts and 102 ways to use blah, blah, blah. I think there's just a few fundamental patterns that once you really wrap your head around, you can write your own, and you don't need any other guide. So first things first. And I almost forgot. John, this is important because these are all of these slides are public. I'm going to put a link to the repository. I'm using reveal.js in order to do these slides, and I'm going to put it in the Zoom chat as well as the on-campus. But you can view this presentation link. This is public link, and you can view my lecture notes later on if you want to. You don't even have to take notes today. But let's talk about it. First things first, what is ChatGPT? It's the best chatbot in the world. That's simple. That's all we need to really understand for today. We're not going to be going over some of the ultra technical algorithmic aspects of it today. It's artificial intelligence, and that's great. At the end of the day, it's a chatbot, but some other things we should understand about ChatGPT is that it's not perfect. It'll get things wrong. It'll make things up. We call them hallucinations. David disagrees with that term. I think it's okay. But when it gets things wrong, it's confidently wrong. And that's probably the problem. You got to do your due diligence. If you've never used ChatGPT before, I'll put this link in the Zoom chat as well. It is chat.openai.com. And when we go to this website, we'll be greeted with ChatGPT. And it is loading. Well, let's talk about some of these features here. All right. Well, when you first visit ChatGPT, you will be, after you've logged in and created an account, you'll be greeted with a few different options here. Number one at the top is you can choose between GPT 3.5 if you are a free member, or GPT 4 if you are a ChatGPT Plus member, which costs money, $20 a month. However, there is a free version, and we're going to be mostly talking about the free version today, frankly, because it's faster. It's also incredibly powerful. GPT-4 is just a little bit more powerful, but slower. A few other things to notice. On the left, you can see your history. This is my ChatGPT history, and you can tell I've been practicing some of the prompts I'm going to be using today. And then at the bottom, here is the send message bar, and I'm just going to say, hello. And ChatGPT responds, how can I assist you today? Well, hello, ChatGPT. There's a few other buttons that come up. Number one is a clipboard. This is a new feature. I really appreciate that. Now, when you click it, it copies to your clipboard, and I can paste it. Okay, fantastic. That means you can take its responses and use it really well. If it's a particularly good or bad response, you can use their thumbs up or thumbs down. And if you want to regenerate the response, there's a button here. And essentially think of it as like re-rolling the last prompt. I'm going to call these prompts and responses. Prompts is everything that you give ChatGPT, and a response is everything ChatGPT gives you. So if I regenerate, I think it actually said the exact same thing. Yeah. Was this response better or worse? It was the same. But notice how I can view the different responses and then edit. What is ChatGPT in one sentence? Save and submit. And then, there's also a lot of demand. So sometimes responses are slow, but it'll respond. And now I can also cycle back and forth, which means everything you give ChatGPT, unless you go in and delete the history, it will be saved. And all the history is on the left. There's a couple configuration options at the bottom. Not going to dive too deep into that. And then here's an important part here. This is the May 12th version. Everything is updating so fast that even some of the slides that I prepared, some of it's already out of date. In GPT-4, there's already these new browsing and plugins and stuff. We're not going to really talk about that today just because we don't have that much time. We're going to talk about the fundamentals. And let's go back to the slideshow. And now that kind of we know what ChatGPT is and what kind of we're talking about, we're going to be talking about why prompt engineering is so important. Some of the whys of prompt engineering. Well, essentially, great prompts are going to give you great results. There's this sense and kind of the saying that ChatGPT will do something like 80 to 90% of the work for you, and you got to do the last 15%. But here's the key. Better prompts mean better results, which means less work for you at the end. And bad prompts can lead to more work for yourself. So there's all of this potential, and it's potential that's unlocked with good prompts. And here's the other aspect of why prompt engineering is important, because as powerful as ChatGPT is, luckily, thankfully, knock on wood, it can't read our mind. Not yet. But it can't read intention unless you give it some intention. So we have to really consider how we are crafting our prompts in order to get what we want. And I threw this in here because I'm old enough to remember a computer lab day in elementary school where the teacher told us how to use this newfangled website called google.com. And today's power hour is kind of like the modern day equivalent of it. Future generations are going to grow up and never imagine a time without ChatGPT or whatever language model is popular. And it's only these tools like ChatGPT are only going to increase in popularity. So it behooves us to really consider how we approach these tools and how we use them. So with all of that being said, and Hex says, yes, there's an art to Googling. I totally agree. Just as there's an art to Googling, there is an art to ChatGPT. What do we need to understand in order to use ChatGPT? What do we need to understand? Because again, I'm trying to avoid the technicality stuff, but there's some stuff that we can talk about that will help us understand how to write good prompts. And the first being is that you should understand that ChatGPT is conversational. So you can talk to it like you're talking to a friend, like a friend who's very knowledgeable and has an literally encyclopedic knowledge of everything. And just like talking to a friend or having a conversation, it has short-term memory. The technical term for this is context, but what it really means is that ChatGPT will remember the current conversation. If I say my favorite color is blue, and then I have more conversations with ChatGPT and then ask, what's my favorite color? It knows. It remembers what I told it, and it can reference things you've said before or things it's said before. So if I said, what do you mean by shades? It will have an understand by context. What do you mean by shades? You can have a conversation with it. And this is just a very powerful aspect of ChatGPT, this conversational, the short-term memory of it. And this is what I mean by it's like the best chatbot in the world. The analogy really is short-term memory. It's not infinite, but it remembers the things that you said in the last couple minutes, last couple messages. The other aspect of ChatGPT is that it is programmed and trained to be helpful. This means, and what we should understand, is that its default behavior is that it is trained on structured question and answer examples. You will kind of notice that if you don't give it a lot of direction and just kind of let it do its default thing, you will get answers that feel a little bit samey. Why do all the lists that it generates have exactly 10 bullet points? Why does it always, end up with a paragraph that says, remember to do blah, 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 or like a follow-up thing? Well, it's because it's trained on examples. And we're going to talk about how to modify and drift away from this default behavior, but it's important enough to know that ChatGPT, number one, is conversational. Number two, has memory. Number three is trying to be helpful, which is a good thing, I think. So now we get to the meat of our presentation, which is we're going to be talking about prompt engineering patterns. I'm so excited. I'm going to be talking about each pattern and then building up an example pattern and showing an example inside of ChatGPT so we can practice this. The first, I'm going to start with the most important. I call this pattern who, what, how. Who? Who is ChatGPT emulating? Who is it speaking to? The key insight here is that ChatGPT is trying to predict a conversation between two different people. And so if you say, imagine you are a senior developer, imagine you are a cybersecurity engineer, you can put it in a particular role and have it predict and generate text based off of who it's imagining. By default, it's just this helpful, ambiguous agent. But for example, imagine you are a senior software developer and I am a candidate interviewing with you for a front-end developer role. Let's talk about what. What do you want it to do? Be specific, and you can use multiple sentences, and you can include formatting, certain things here, but you got to give it a direction. I like to think of it as, please do blank. Please blank. For example, please ask me a series of technical interview questions about React.js and tell me what you think of my responses. I think you can see where this is going here. ChatGPT, as a software developer, can help me practice for an interview. If I'm a front-end developer and I want to get that job, I can practice this in the comfort of my own home. How? How really is like the flags or options in the terminal. Do you want it to give a long response? Do you want it to give a big, short response? And I like to think of it as respond with blank. Cam says, be polite to the AI, so I'm spared when it takes over the world. You know, Cam, that's an important part because you don't have to use the word please. You really don't. It won't make a difference. But you want to model the behavior and the energy that you want back, to project in the world that you want back into you. And if you've ever seen a child be rude to Alexa, you're like, hey, we want to at least model polite behavior here. So I like to try this. And JP says it won't make a difference yet. Yes. Emphasis on the yet. John says you're not saying please to computer, you know. Anyways. So I could say something like, ask one question at a time. And then just for fun, respond in a Western accent. Okay, let's see what happens. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back into ChatGPT, start a new chat. There's a button in here. And so my favorite color, blue, is shown up in history. I'm going to do this in GPT-4. And if all goes well, hey, and now it's going to give me an interview question in a Western accent. Let me zoom in just a little bit. Howdy there, partner. Now I reckon I know the first thing I'd like to know about is this. Can you explain to me the difference between class components and functional components in React? This is great. It is literally putting me in the position to help me practice my interview. Now, keep this response in mind. With if I just open a new chat and I don't give it directions. Please interview me for a front-end developer role. And it'll give you a decent response, but it's not emulating the back and forth nature of an interview because it's just listing out questions. So, you know, it makes a difference how we ask. And that's the point. Okay. The next pattern, I call it the conversational funnel. It's what you ask when you don't know exactly what question you need to ask. And I talked about the conversational aspect of ChatGPT, so you can treat it like a knowledgeable friend, and it's just like you're having a conversation. So the idea here is that you start broad and go narrow, and you start to narrow down. This is the conversational funnel, starting broad and going narrow. And so let's build up a series of back and forth prompts. For example, we're going to do this in ops. We're going to do this with ops right now. So I'm going to kind of drag this to the side and pull out ChatGPT here. Start a new conversation and ask, what is a firewall? Okay. So I'm going to start a new chat here. What is a firewall? And ChatGPT is going to give me a great answer here. Security device or software that acts as a barrier between a trusted internal network. Okay. This is a very broad question. And the primary purpose of a firewall is to enforce a network security policy. Examines data packets. Okay, cool. Well, let's go back to the presentation and start to ask some follow-up questions. What kind of follow-up questions might I think of based off of its response? Well, let's see, maybe I want to know, how does it examine network packets? The whole idea here is that I'm starting with a broad concept like what is a firewall. And by analyzing the result, and we don't have to read the entire result today, just enough to know that it's mentioning data packets, and I can start to narrow down. I'm like, okay, well, actually, what I really need to learn about is how does it analyze data packets? So when I ask this question, everything that has been answered and asked before is now in its short-term memory, and that's the key. It knows that I'm talking about firewalls. Firewalls examine network packets by inspecting their headers and payload. Great answer. And so if you, as a learning tool, whether you are a software developer or a cybersecurity professional or engineer, you can ask it questions and follow-ups. And this is an example of going back to the who, what, how pattern, where the who and the how is really all implied. It's being a helpful bot, and it's giving me its default styled responses. But I can just keep asking it questions and narrow down on what okay, cool. And the other analogy that I think of is if you've ever been on one Wikipedia page and then you go on clicking a whole bunch of links, and all of a sudden you're reading about the history of Mexico. And ChatGPT can be like that, where you start asking and answering follow-up questions, and you just get the more questions you ask, the more you realize there is to learn. Question: is there a confidence score on how accurate it thinks the answer is? There is in the API, but not in this setting. But you can actually get information in the response about how confident it was in the next thing it predicted. And so, yeah. But that's outside of this tool inside of ChatGPT. This is when it gets things wrong, it is unfortunately very confidently wrong. Yeah, and then JB, to your point, confidence score is you're right. It's different from a confidence score. It basically gives the probability of the next token it predicted, what its likelihood is, which is a slightly different thing than a confidence score per se. But another thing we can ask is to use an analogy. Here's another really powerful tool and application of ChatGPT, which is to ask it to explain a concept with an analogy, or to explain things simply and give an explanation and include an analogy. Please explain a firewall with an analogy. Okay, and ops folks, chime in on the chat if this is a good analogy or not. Let's imagine a firewall as a security guard at the entrance of a building. Okay, in this analogy, the building represents your computer network and the security guard represents the firewall. Can I get like a reaction? Is that a good enough? I don't know squat about firewalls.
Yeah, I agree, Adam.
You agree? Awesome. Okay, great. And then Sam says you'd say it's close. Cool. Here's how the analogy breaks down: entrance control, rule enforcement, traffic inspection, stateful monitoring, content. Wow. Okay, cool. There's a lot to firewalls. Okay. By acting as a gatekeeper, the security guard ensures that only legitimate and authorized people, traffic enters the building network. Okay. Simplifies. Okay, cool. All right, great. So it gives a little bit of context there. And then once you really narrowed things down, I recommend applying the who, what, how pattern. So I know, for example, that pfSense is an important program, firewall program in ops. Is that correct? Can I get like a confirmation in the class? Okay, cool. Thumbs up. Okay, great. Cool. So imagine you're a cybersecurity professional. When would you recommend using a firewall like pfSense? Please respond with the table showing the pros and cons. So this kind of shows the different aspects of the who, what, how method. And for the record, responding with analogy is an example of how, but you can also have it respond with a table. And so, hey, ChatGPT recommends it for small to medium-sized businesses. It has a customizable and flexible requirements. All right. Here's a table summarizing the pros and cons. Pros, highly customizable and flexible. Cons, requires technical expertise to set up and management. That is typically the trade-off, right? The more customizable and flexible something is, the more expertise you need in order to operate it, which is why Androids are better than iPhones. Don't at me. Okay, back to the presentation. This is the conversational funnel. We can go even further though. I call this pattern very simply, do blank with blank. Okay, this is basically putting ChatGPT in instruct mode, and I use this pattern a lot. However, it requires you to understand that you know what you want. Bing, boom, very important. For example, please add comments to this code. Please give me a tutorial on how to set up pfSense. Please refactor this script written in Python to be more efficient. I'm building blank and getting this error. Find the bugs in blank. It is basically, you give it something and then you give an instruction to perform on top of it. So, for example, let's open this in a new tab just to get a really good view here. I don't need that zoomed in though. This is my prompt, or will be my prompt. Please complete this function. Do. What is the what? Okay. Python takes in two integers, a comment takes in two integers as input and returns their sum as an output. And I've got the start of a function that has parameters, but no body of the code. And I'm asking ChatGPT to be a code completion helper. And the key insight here is that I'm being very specific about what I want, and I'm giving it a space to fill in and giving it direction. If I just said, write a function that takes in two numbers, it's guessing, and I don't want it to guess. Also, please notice that I'm using tools like adding a colon, adding a line break between the do instruction and the what stuff. Also notice I'm using markdown syntax here with backticks and the language that I'm using. And this is because ChatGPT, what it responds with is markdown. So you want to speak its language at the end of the day. You want to speak its language. And I'll show you what this looks like. John asks, how would ChatGPT answer the question there without the comments? Ooh, good question. Let's figure it out. We're going to go here. We're going to do a new chat. Please complete this function. Okay, let's see what it does. Here's the completed function. Aha. Notice how it responded in a code block. And when I copy the code and paste, well, I was expecting it to have the code block syntax around it, so maybe never mind. But it does allow you to copy and paste everything inside here, which is great. Let's ask and answer John's question, which is what would happen if I removed the comments here? Please complete this function. Now, I will say that I did also name my function and used parameters that made sense, but let's answer the question here, because this is a good thought experiment. Part of prompt engineering is just a lot of trial and error to see what the limits are, see what's going to happen. And notice how I'm editing my response. I'm not giving a new response at the bottom because my old one would be in its memory, and I purposefully want it out of its short-term memory. So in this case, John, the answer to your question is it was able to figure it out. But I have definitely done experiments where if you're not doing a simple function, if you are having a complicated function, or if you don't have very specific, function names and parameter names, the more a complicated task you assign it to do, the more guidance you tend to need to give it. And it completes the function. And John says he loves how it explains the code underneath it. I totally agree. It's great. And everything that it gives back to you is just another jumping off point for follow-up questions. Okay, please, for example, say I'm completely new to Python, and I know there are developers in the audience who have never done Python before. Please explain the syntax of this line of code. And the code is Python. And it can get really granular. And this is what I love, is that no matter how broad you start, you can go really granular with it. The line of code return num1 plus num2 is a return statement. And that could spark a whole other conversation on what's a return statement. It specifies the value that the function should return when it is called. John Kokos asks, would it ask you for clarification or just flail? It generally doesn't ask for clarification in my experience, unless you ask it, specifically tell it to, hey, ask questions if you're confused. It typically tries to guess, at least in my experience. It just kind of fails or flails. And Lacey, sorry, I missed your comment earlier. You said when I get really lost on a code challenge and there's no TA available, I'll give it a prompt like that and ask it follow-up questions. It's like a sage mode. Yeah, it totally is. And which is why I think ChatGPT is one of the best learning tools in your toolkit. And I really mean learning tools, because it's also a great developer tool, but we're all here at CodeFellows to learn. And whether you're learning ops or you're learning code, it can just be a great kind of like customized Stack Overflow for any question you might have. And it's fantastic. All right. So now that we've kind of experienced with this do what, let's go back to the slideshow really quickly here. A wrinkle with this do blank with blank is that you can give examples. You could say, add comments to this code, add comments like this example. And you could say, refactor the script, and here's an example of a refactored script. And so you can always give it examples. And the insight here is that examples you give are part of its short-term memory. And so it becomes part of its context and it goes, okay, I can repeat this pattern. So you want me to apply pattern A to code block B. Okay, I can do that. So do blank with blank. I tend to use this one a lot, especially when I'm developing, because frankly, I'll run into a bug and I'll start with ChatGPT can you make heads or tails of this bug, for example. So, and I love the chat because people are bringing in their own experiences with ChatGPT, which is fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to some questions. I want to thank everyone for coming. Think about this, how will you use ChatGPT to become a better developer or better cybersecurity engineer? And I want to challenge you in one aspect because May is Mental Health Month. And I want to talk about at least one aspect of ChatGPT that has helped me in my life very recently, which is it has helped me stay organized. And I see some hands. I'll get to the hands in just a second. But self-management and self-care is something that ChatGPT can give you advice on. It gave me techniques for managing my own time. It gave me, my dog sheds all the time. So it gave me a sketch for when and how I should clean my apartment. It gave me tips on cooking chicken breast, which helps me eat healthy and saves money on food. And so if you're eating healthy and you're in a clean environment and you're getting enough sleep and you're managing your time, your mental health can absolutely be improved. And so all of these things can help. Also, the ancillary supporting things help make you a better developer. So thank you very much. Let's get to some questions. John, I see your hand up. What's up, man?
The question I've got really is a mechanical one, which was I was watching you do this, and sometimes you're at the bottom prompt, sometimes you're editing your previous prompt, sometimes you're in 3.5, sometimes you're in ChatGPT 4.
Yes.
You just you're doing that as a thing, right?
Yep.
What's the reasons why you pick those two prompting areas and the version? What makes you choose those things as far as using the tool the best way?
Great question. Today, I mostly used 3.5 just for presentational aspects. It's faster. If it was 4, we're going to have to wait a long time for it to come up with its whole answer. So that's mostly just a presentational aspect. Also, because I pay for ChatGPT Plus, I have access to it. The free version does use 3.5. So I did want to also show off, hey, you can do this in the free version. Now, you asked an important question. When do I edit my response or ask a new one? And the answer is, do I want to continue the conversation or do I want to erase part of its short-term memory and go a different route? The follow-up question would be down here, explaining this syntax line of code. But if I said, please complete this function, but multiply by 5, I'm not going to add, I could add that at the bottom, but to me, it's a whole new conversation. And so whenever there's a branch in the conversation, I'm going to start over, or I'm going to purposefully go up the chain because previous responses that I want in its short-term memory are now in here. If you go too down in the conversation, it can start to lose track of the thread. And so I go back up in time in order to manage that.
Okay, so up in here where you're editing there, that is kind of re-kicking off the same conversation. At the
Yes.
bottom, send a message. It's continuing the current conversation. And on the left, new chat says, forget all of that and start something completely green. Am I understanding that right?
That's exactly right. However,
Okay.
I will say that starting a new chat or editing the very first box here is effectively the same thing because it's both starting from 0. Okay, great questions. Hand up from, I'm going to butcher your name. I'm sorry, Rocio Martinez.
Yes, thank you. So I might be a little bit nosy with this question, but I want to know how you use it as a learning tool. Like, at what point in your process do you say, I'm going to ChatGPT right now? Is it when you're looking at something and you don't understand what's going on? Or do you make an attempt and then say, I'm getting nowhere? Do you try to talk to someone else first? When do you go and use this?
That's a really important question, and especially, because you're asking as a student, I assume, and so you kind of have to start thinking about these things. So I appreciate the question. For me, I use ChatGPT whenever I'm curious, and I tend to use it as a starting point or a follow-up. Sometimes I will start my search with the documentation and in Google. But really, it's just whenever I'm curious and I just want to know, hey, what can ChatGPT add? Can it add anything? And so I use ChatGPT I try to use it for everything. I mean, that's just for me. It speeds up my development and learning process. And some people will ask the philosophical question, is it cheating? And I feel like, well, I save time in the initial process, but the time I save, I use to practice more and really cement it. So I don't feel like at the very end that I'm cheating myself. But it's always going to be a question that you ask for yourself, and everyone's going to have a slightly different answer about when to use ChatGPT and when, under what circumstances. I do think, especially in Code Fellows, that you will go further by really trying to problem solve without it first, and then using it as a safety net, using it as a TA when it's 2 o'clock in the morning and no TAs around to help you, but definitely, especially at the beginning stages, get those reps in and practice in without it first. That's my recommendation. John asks, is a carpenter using a miter box cheating? Yeah, exactly. These are just tools at the end. It should be a supplement to your reasoning powers and not a replacement. That's my friendly advice. Great question. Okay, let me check chat. Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, look at me finishing on time. Everyone, thank you so much for coming to today's presentation. I really appreciate you making it out. Again, the links to these slides are in the Slack on Campus channel. You can go back and you can view my notes. I had speaker notes the entire time here, so you can view notes about my thoughts on everything and go out there and experiment. This technology is so new. The crazy thing about ChatGPT, really, to me, mind-blowing, is that it came out in December. We're all just newbies at this, really, grand scheme of things. And, you're going to discover new ways of doing things. I haven't even scratched the surface today about all the different ways that you could possibly use it. You can use it. I asked ChatGPT, I saw an example of how to have it do a Harry Potter text adventure game, and it did that. So anyways, there is a world of possibilities, and I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you so much for attending today's presentation. The recording will be posted, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your weekend.